Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom. We are very pleased that author Jeffrey Lord, who served as Associate Political Director in President Ronald Reagan's White House and subsequently became a highly visible political commentator on cable news network, is with us today. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Lois. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful. And Mr. Lord became CNN's first paid pro-Trump contributor in July 2015. Ironically, Mr. Trump recommended Jeff Lord to CNN after complaining that all the CNN panelists disliked him. But Mr. Lord's tenure at CNN came to an abrupt end when he was fired for tweeting a Nazi tweet, which he wrote that he had made to mock the real fascists in the dispute with the group Media Matters. His latest book, which we will discuss today, reveals the battle between the hostile federal bureaucratic network that has been operating in the shadows and the American people who voted Trump into office to wipe out the swamp and reduce the power of the bureaucracy. The book's title is Swamp Wars: Donald Trump and the New American Populism versus the Old Order. Jeff, is there a difference between the conspiracy term deep state and the swamp?
There is, absolutely. The deep state generally refers to people connected with the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Justice, and government bureaucracies like that. The swamp, I think of it often in terms of a line that Ronald Reagan used when he made his famous speech for Barry Goldwater in 1964. And he said that the nation should not be governed by, I believe his phrase was, a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital. And what you've got here is an elite here in Washington. Washington is most assuredly the capital of the swamp. But in point of fact, swamps are all over the country. They're in academia, they're in the media, they're in the legal profession. You can find them. They all sort of think the same, and they all think they're better than everybody else.
Yes, exactly. And Jeff, in your book, you argue that the Washington bureaucrats are seeking to undermine the presidency of Donald Trump. Well, can you give us the top two examples?
Sure. The first is the Mueller probe.
Yeah.
I mean, this was all about Trump-Russia collusion, and there is none. But yet they've got an extension here for another X number of months to keep doing this and doing this. So far, nobody has been convicted of colluding with Russians.
And they're spending millions.
Exactly, and they're spending millions of dollars. The other is the more interesting way that they do things here. When they oppose your agenda, like Scott Pruitt or Andrew Wheeler at the EPA, what they do is they go out of their way to bring up extraneous issues that really have nothing to do with the issue, with the environment, but because they so can't stand the person's political agenda, they undermine them by saying, oh, well, he leased something from a lobbyist, or you know, issues like this. They did the same thing with the Reagan EPA and Secretary of the Interior, and it's a time-worn thing that they do.
That's right, and people forget. It happens again and again and again. Well, in your book, you wrote that one of the ways of understanding the American old order is best understood by asking the question, what is and who is the old order? Can you answer that question?
Sure. There are people who believe they're intellectually and morally superior to average Americans.
And they all work in the Washington bureaucracy, in the federal bureaucracy.
Right. I mean, if you just looked at the contributions, the campaign contributions that are on record from the people who work in these bureaucracies, I mean, they're overwhelmingly in the last presidential election for Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
That's because they are themselves liberals, and they believe in liberal activist government, and that's why they're in these jobs. But as I say, they're all around the country, and whether they're educating your kids or they're in, in courtrooms, et cetera, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. And as I say, there are swamps everywhere.
Okay, yes, that's really discouraging. Well, today, unelected media, not elected politicians, decide who gets attention. I mean, for our media, Donald Trump is the issue, and removing him from office is the goal.
Right.
So your book discusses the role of the media in the swamp. Can you tell us more about that?
They have an agenda. I call them the liberal state media, and they're pushing the liberal agenda, whatever that is. And I'll give you one quick example from as we sit here. In 2018, Time magazine put a little girl, Honduran girl, who'd been brought illegally over the border by her mother, illegally. And the mother puts her down when she's being searched by the Border Patrol agent, and the little girl, exhausted, 2 years old, cries.
Of course.
A photographer takes a picture of this. They put this on the cover of Time magazine, taking everything else out, and have President Trump photoshopped in so he's towering above this little girl, and the caption is, "Welcome to America." Well, it was falsely presented. I mean, first of all, the Border Patrol didn't take her away. Her mother just put her down and kept her there. Contrast that to a terrible incident in 2019 where a young California police officer, who himself is a legal American immigrant, gets shot to death by, allegedly, by a illegal immigrant. Are they on the cover of Time magazine?
No.
No. Is that officer's 5-month-old child on the cover?
No.
No, because that works against the liberal agenda, so they don't do it.
It's amazing. I mean, with the loss of the House and the resignation of the Defense Secretary, President Trump has had a very tough end of the year in 2018, and many believe that he'll be impeached or he'll be challenged in the primaries if he seeks re-election. I mean, what do you think will happen?
Well, certainly there are people in the Democratic caucus that want to impeach him. There's no question about that. I find it very interesting that Speaker Pelosi is not thrilled with this idea. She's been around the block. She knows that this kind of thing can backfire. Republicans realize it backfired. President Clinton was hugely popular.
Yes,
it didn't work.
that's right.
And I think President Trump sees this and kind of chuckles and says, make my day.
Yes, that's right, because it's going to work against the Democrats if they go
Right.
forward, right? Well, now the other issue is our national debt is near $22 trillion. It's hard to believe. We are about to lose the war in Afghanistan, and Russia and China are united against us, something that eliminates the best work of President Ronald Reagan. Do you think the swamp is responsible for the state of affairs, and can you describe how we go forward?
Yeah, absolutely, they're responsible. And they have very much the quote-unquote conventional wisdom. This is the way we've always done this kind of thing, which is why they don't like President Trump. He was handed this $1.3 trillion budget last year, and he signed onto it reluctantly, but he said, never again. This is the way this town works. It's all very swampy. I learned this when I was a young aide to a congressman on the budget committee, and members are just besieged by swamp denizens all day long. That's how we get the deficit.
So they're besieged by lobbyists.
Absolutely.
All the time, right?
Absolutely they are. Now, I mean, in fairness to lobbyists, and I am not one, but they have a constitutional right to do that. But we get into a situation here where these people have more power than the folks who sent the congressman there, and that's the problem.
Yeah. And let's look back. How did the intelligence community, the FBI and the CIA, part of the swamp, affect Donald Trump's campaign for president?
Well, the first thing they did is not taking a serious look at Hillary Clinton, who had the emails and all of this sort of thing. They just gave her a pass.
And who did that exactly?
So, well, that was the FBI, and Peter Strzok, the FBI agent, was apparently heavily involved in that investigation.
And his wife worked for her campaign, didn't she?
No, that's Bruce Orr.
That's Bruce Orr. That's right.
Bruce Orr, right. But what they did is they changed the language of the investigation so that it wouldn't seem like it was an indictable offense. Taking a cue, I might add, from President Obama, who used the same language about Hillary Clinton. So that was one way they did it. And then they got into this whole Russia investigation thing, and it's very interesting. Senator Feinstein of California had a Chinese spy on her staff.
I read that.
The FBI finds this out. What do? They don't investigate Senator Feinstein. They go to her and say, you've got this problem. You need to know it. She fires the staff person, etc. If they thought that there was something going on with the Russians and Donald Trump, they should have gone to the candidate and said, you got this problem. Instead, they try and fancy it up as an intelligence investigation because they're looking for a crime that hasn't been committed.
That's amazing. That's in your book about very interesting. Well, Donald Trump was truly an outsider when he ran for office. He did not have a cadre of established politicians with him. Is this why he fired so many people in his first year of his presidency?
Every president, and I, having worked in the White House myself, I've seen this. I Googled the story about chaos in the Trump White House. I took out the name Trump and substituted the last 5 presidents' names individually.
Really?
Obama, Bush 43, Clinton, Bush 41, and Reagan. And every single time up popped stories that White House was in chaos.
That was the headline.
That was
the White
headline,
House. Okay.
Right. And my point is, no matter who you are, you could be the most experienced person in government in the world, or you could be like Donald Trump, new at it. But it takes time to understand that you're the president and understand how it works so that you mesh the president's personality and programs with the staffing requirements. I think President Trump is now well there as all of his predecessors got to be.
But they've all struggled with that.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. And you wrote that the old order is obsessed with cultural and political control, which can best be explained by the Senate confirmation of Trump nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Can you tell us more?
Sure. I was in the Reagan White House for the Bork nomination. And Robert Bork, later in his memoirs, said that it became clear to him that this was about more than just one judge.
And this is Bork, who was nominated for Supreme Court.
For the Supreme Court in 1987 by President Reagan,
okay.
And was defeated. And Bork said this was about the culture. This was not about just one judge. That battle is still going on. And the reason it goes on, and was so evident in the Kavanaugh hearings, is that the American left views the Supreme Court and the judicial system in general as like another legislature.
Okay.
And their unpopularity with various ideas can't make it through the legislative process, so they try and get it done through judges that they get on the bench who will
see it their way.
See it their way.
Yeah.
And so to have somebody like Brett Kavanaugh is a real serious threat to them, because Brett Kavanaugh is a by-the-book constitutional conservative, and they don't like that.
Well, don't you think it's pretty amazing that he was nominated, that he was approved? I mean, that was
The thing that I find so amazing is that Brett Kavanaugh was not some Trump crony. I mean, this was
he was a judge, a serious judge. Yeah.
Serious judge. He was a real, if you will, establishment Republican. In political lingo, he was a Bushy.
Okay.
And they made this fuss about him that was just absolutely mind-boggling. But that's why they do it. They would have done it to everybody. And my favorite story from all of that was that they had signs or things ready to go. With just the fill in the blank, because they didn't know who the nominee, but it would have been the same regardless.
Amazing, amazing. Well, you wrote in your book, Swamp Wars, that anti-Semitism is flourishing on the left, which was surprising to me. Why does no one care, and can you elaborate on this claim?
Sure. It's been around for a long time. I noticed that as a reader of history, President Truman, of course, was Democrat, was the president who recognized the state of Israel. You go to his memoirs, and he talks about how there were liberal bureaucrats in the State Department that very much opposed him on this. And he said he thought it was anti-Semitism. You move all the way up to the 2012 Democratic Convention, and they always had a platform plank that talked about Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the U.S. Embassy.
Sure.
Well, it met with vociferous opposition, so much so that they had to gavel it through with the chairman pounding it through over a voice vote, etc. This has been there for a long time. And the New York Times has been running stories on some of these new House members talking about the evil doings of Israel and all this sort of thing. This is very much there on the American left, and there are a lot of people on the American left who are uncomfortable with talking about it.
Well, it's not widely reported, that's for sure. Well, I'd like to get to a very topical discussion here about describe your recent firing from CNN, because that was so dramatic in your book.
Well, I'll give you the shorthand version of it. Is that I had been for a long time going after this far left-wing group called Media Matters, and they've got.
Where are they based? Are they based in?
Honestly don't know whether they may be based here. Yeah,
Okay.
When I think about it, they may be based here. But the problem with them is, they don't like Fox News, and fine. So they've got a website and they put their view of things. That's fine. But what they do is they go out of their way to take conservatives off the air, to bully their advertisers. Over time, they've targeted Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity.
So how do they target their advertisers? I mean, do they send letters? Do they?
Yes, and it's very clever in this day and age, is because they can make a handful of people seem like 10,000 people with Twitter and all of these kind of things.
A lot of faxes and
right. So this is what they're about. And I had written a column at that particular moment. They were after Sean Hannity. And I called them the Media Matters fascists and went after them and talked about Hannity, et cetera. Well, I'm working at CNN. This did not go down well. And I had discovered, to get back to your question on anti-Semitism, that they had been condemned repeatedly by people on the American left, Alan Dershowitz, others, people on the right, for some pretty vivid examples of anti-Semitism. So I wrote this in the column, and imagine how they rewrite the First Amendment, did it, and then I said as a tagline there that the American Spectator could not confirm that the final two words in the draft new First Amendment were Sig Heil. Well, when
a Nazi slate.
yeah, because I knew they had this reputation, and CNN was not pleased, and I was on my way to New York to do Anderson Cooper's show, and in a CNN car, and they saw this, and the car was turned around, and you know, I was home before you know it, and the pumpkin disappeared. The coach became a pumpkin, and Cinderella's life was done at CNN.
It's too bad, really, because you were a conservative voice in a network that doesn't have very many, right?
Right. Well, and I learned, you know, there was pressure there from Media Matters long before that, and others on the left to get rid of me, and they told me this, you know. So
so you basically hung in there for 2 years.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the President Obama and his administration. Do you think President Obama knew about the spy operation of Trump during the campaign that was made by certain people in the FBI and intelligence community? I mean, do you think?
I do think that. I mean, I don't have any evidence of it, but in reading people who say that there are anonymous references to someone, they think that someone is President Obama. Now, you know, on the one hand, President Obama is said to have had, you know, great control over his administration, and he knew what was going on and all of that. And then we get to something like this, and oh no, he had no idea. But trust me, this kind of thing doesn't go on without somebody in higher circles,
especially in the White House, maybe.
Correct.
Knowing what's going on. Well, let's discuss the media again. And in your book, you wrote that many reporters and TV hosts and correspondents who are supposed to report the truth do not. I'm sorry, not the truth, the facts.
Right.
Hopefully truthful facts. Instead, they offer their opinion. A good example of this is CNN's Jim Acosta, who didn't simply report Kardashian's presence in the White House to push for prison reform and a pardon for Alice Johnson. Instead, Acosta played the liberal pundit, telling the CNN audience that she shouldn't be here talking about prison reform. It's very nice that she's here, but that's not a serious thing to have happened to here at the White House. I mean, care to comment on Acosta's opinion?
Well, I know Jim Acosta. I like him. You know, he was great as a colleague. I didn't know him all, but we shared panel duty and all that kind of thing. And Jim Acosta is not alone in this, is that people in the liberal media outlets have long since gotten to the point where their opinion about issues is what's used to report the news. I mean, very recently we had a former executive editor of the New York Times saying that the news columns of the New York Times had an anti-Trump bias. Well, no kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And this is what they do. And you can like it or not like it. I think that their ratings and credibility and all of that, but that's their decision. I'm very much a believer in a free press. They want to do it. It's up to them. But then I think people tune out to a certain extent.
Yes. Let's just discuss the establishment Republican Party inside the Beltway. I mean, people may not understand why the GOP establishment was not on board with Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Did they have a problem with Donald Trump's style or his politics?
To some degree, it was his politics, but I think very much his style. I mean, look, my family, extended family on both sides, are from Eastern Long Island in New York. I understand the dynamics of Queens, and Donald Trump is Queens incarnate. He is very blunt spoken.
He's a New Yorker.
He's a New Yorker. I mean, which to me, I mean, it didn't even occur to me. It's not like hearing a foreign language to me because I hear it all the time. But I do think that there are people for whom politics is more style than substance, and they go after him. I mean, when Mitt Romney writes pieces in a piece in the Washington Post, or Jeff Flake, in essence, blew up his own Senate career because he was so concerned about style, not substance. That's a problem with Republicans. This was a problem that Ronald Reagan used to talk about. And they said in the day that Ronald Reagan was an extremist and, you know, the Republican Party would go down the drain and all this from people who conveniently seem not to be able to win the presidency on their own.
Exactly. And Ronald Reagan was such a fabulous politician and such a great messenger, delivered the message so beautifully. Well, former Republican Congressman Flake and Bob Corker, and now Senator Mitt Romney seem to really dislike Trump. I mean, what do you think about these Republicans?
I think this problem has been around for a very long time. The Dewey Republicans, before I was on this planet, said only a moderate liberal Republican establishment Republican can win. Well, Thomas Dewey, then the governor of New York, ran for president twice and lost twice. And the second time, it was the upset of the century because everybody presumed he was the next president, and Harry Truman upended him. This has been going on for a very long time. This is only the latest incarnation of it.
Okay.
It used to drive Ronald Reagan crazy, and I'm sure it drives Donald Trump crazy, but he beat him.
Yeah.
And you know, good for him.
And so now Mitt Romney, I think he's starting to soften his approach. I mean, now, you know.
We got a lot of blowback.
He got a lot of blowback, yeah, yeah. I mean, when your book comes out this spring, what will you tell people about this book that will surprise them?
Oh, I think the ins and outs of CNN, without doubt.
Like what, for instance?
Oh, well, gosh, there were so many things, but you know, they were very kind to me in so many ways. I was taking care of my then 97, 98-year-old mom. They made sure that I got, you know, back to see her at night because, you know, I'm taking care of her, and routine is very important for seniors. They were terrific with that, but they felt the need to quote unquote protect me from internal criticism and all of this sort of thing. And I thought, you know, I worked my way through Capitol Hill and the White House. I've been a columnist for a long time, an author. Pretty mainstream publications, the Wall Street Journal, other places publish me. Why do I need protection? Well, and the answer is that there were a lot of people there that didn't like Donald Trump, and I, you know, was speaking up for him, and that was a problem.
Well, did people come up to you when you were off air and describe how they were disappointed in you, or they were upset with you?
Well, it evolved sort of naturally. I mean, they would suggest that I criticize him so that I didn't seem like I was defending him. But just the natural evolution of things. I mean, I viewed a lot of my colleagues, terrific people, one and all, but that they were defending the liberal state, if you will.
Always, yeah.
And it was interesting to me that my colleagues who defended Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama didn't receive the same kind of
protection,
right? They didn't need it.
That's right. That's for sure. And well, what is the old order's view on immigration? It's such a hot topic right now in the news. I mean, it's very different from President Trump's view, I would think. I mean, can you give us specific details?
They don't want the wall.
They don't want the wall.
They don't want the wall.
But yet they have voted for money for a barrier fence. I mean, they seem to be, I mean, already money has been spent.
The problem is, one of the problems is they can't stand the president.
Okay.
So they start from there. But the other thing, and I find this very interesting, it's not just that they can't stand the president. They can't stand his supporters. You know, regular Americans out there.
The deplorables, right?
Right, the deplorables. And it really is this sort, you know, it reminds me, and I say this in the book, it reminds me of junior high school.
Yeah.
You had the cool crowd, the cool kids, the in crowd, and then you had the geeks and the nerds and the kids that weren't very popular.
Right.
It's very much that kind of mentality here. And so it surfaces as different issues come along, and the wall certainly is one of them.
Yeah, yeah. So this thing could carry on for a while, then, you think?
And God bless President Trump for doing this. I mean, this is exactly, to get back to the Republican establishment, this is what so many people, so many grassroots Republicans saw as wrong, is that the establishment Republicans would just cave. Margaret Thatcher used to call it the socialist ratchet. and Donald Trump is there to say, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Exactly. Well, how do you view Mueller's investigation? I mean, what do you think will happen there? I mean, how long will it take? I mean, who knows, right?
I mean, they just asked for an extension and they got the extension. Lois, you and I know the way Washington works. If they had something, this would have been leaked by now.
Absolutely.
Rest assured.
Absolutely.
How long did it take for Richard Nixon's smoking gun news to get out?
Exactly.
So I just don't think they have anything. And why? I mean, Trump did not need the Russians to win the election. I mean, that's just crazy on its face.
And then I found it so interesting in your book that you worked with former Congressman Jack Kemp when he was the boss at HUD under George H.W. Bush. And it was Jack Kemp, who co-sponsored legislation to make Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a national holiday. I
Yes.
don't think people realize this.
Jack Kemp was very much a fan of Dr. King, whom he always called Dr. King. And when he was in football still, as the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills and the president of the Players Union, there was segregation in New Orleans. And they arrived to play a championship game, and his teammates can't get taxis. This is like 1965. It sent him through the roof. They moved the game to Houston. So he stood up in the day, and he would often say, I wasn't there when Dr. King was active, but I'm here now, and I'm going to do something about it.
Well, don't you think that the old order is using race to depict Donald Trump as a racist?
Oh, absolutely. And I talk about this often in columns and in the book. The old order, and if you look at the American left and the Democratic Party, which came to life in 1800, used slavery as its main political force. And when that ended after the Civil War, they used segregation. I mean, and you go back and you read their platforms, 20 platforms supporting segregation of their silent on the subject. Now, it's identity politics, which on CNN I would call the son of segregation. They're still at it because it's good fuel to get elected and then pursue whatever part of their agenda they want to pursue.
Well, this book is just fascinating to read. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that many people will order it. And so where can our viewers find your book?
You can find it on Amazon and Walmart and all this. It will be out in the spring, in May, I believe.
And then you can find it in local bookstores.
And you can find it absolutely in local bookstores, and you can pre-order it.
Okay. Well, Jeffrey, one more quick question. Do you have another book coming?
I haven't gotten that far yet, but most assuredly I will. This will be number 3, and we'll go on to number 4. There's no shortage of things to write about, I can say that.
Well, so glad and so happy that you were here today. Thank you for being
Thanks,
a guest
Lois.
on our program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.